If we nominate another candidate in the mold of a Bob Dole or a John McCain or a Mitt Romney, all of whom are good, honorable, decent men, but if we nominate another candidate in that mold, the same people who stayed home in 08 and 12 will stay home in 2016, and the Democrats will win again.
There's a quiet rumble coursing through the land as we barrel headfirst into the 2016 presidential election wars, that of Hispanics losing their temper and their patience with Democratic lawmakers, and perhaps even considering a slip to what the left would consider the dark side. And there's one unlikely candidate who might be able to make this a Republican coup come these elections. Let's welcome back to Midpoint, nationally syndicated columnist, former editorial board member of the San Diego Union-Tribune, never one to shy away from a controversy. Ruben Navarrette Jr. joins us today. Ruben, good to see you again.
Great to be with you again.
Ruben, I have to tell you, we were a little bit surprised because you have come to loggerheads every now and then with Ted Cruz. You have vehemently disagreed with a lot of things that he has said. However, you just recently called him an authentic Hispanic. What did you mean by that?
Well, I've known Ted for about 12 years, long since before he went to the Senate, back when he was working for the Bush administration. And I may have written a dozen columns, most of them favorable toward Ted. But you're right. On immigration, he and I have gone against each other. But on this issue of his authenticity, let's say, I'm very sympathetic to people who think if they think he's not Hispanic enough or not authentically Hispanic. I'm very sympathetic to Ted, thinking that's a ridiculous question. It's a personal thing how you define yourself, whether you're Jewish, Italian, Irish, or whatever. And so I came to his defense. All
right, Ruben, come on now. You called him in the past, and I'm going to quote you now, that he comes across as Cuban-American royalty telling less worthy peasants from Mexico and Central America to eat flan. That's pretty harsh. So what all of a sudden made you start to, it almost seems as if you're cozying up to Ted here as he's getting closer to a presidential run?
Well, let me explain. The first quote is, the whole nature of being Cuban-American is you come to this country with an advantage, the wet foot, dry foot policy, the Cuban Adjustment Act, right? It said basically that it's very hard to come to the United States illegally from Cuba once you hit dry shore. So you have to be careful if you're Cuban-American to lecture Mexicans about how to come to the country legally. When you come into the country, here's another phrase for you, on a magic carpet. And so that's where that phrase comes from, and that's where the conversation, the disagreement over immigration comes from. But the notion of how Jewish you are, Irish you are, Italian you are, how Mexican or Cuban you are, I think it's very close to home, and it's really nobody's business but your own. And so whenever I hear Ted attacked on those grounds, I'm going to come to his defense.
What makes you think, though, that Hispanics might actually turn to Ted Cruz? Because there are many, and people that I've spoken with, who say, wait a minute, his stance on immigration itself is insulting to many Hispanics, and that's why we don't want him there. So what would turn any sort of a tide here?
Well, it's a very good point. I think when you really dissect the Hispanic community and the electorate, and particularly on the Republican side, looking at the primary, it's going to be very hard for Ted to find room to stand, because those who are in Florida might go for someone like Marco Rubio. Those in the Southwest, they might not warm up to him in places like California or New Mexico or elsewhere. Ted's going to get a good chunk of Hispanics from Texas. He already enjoys, according to our internal polls, about 40% support from Hispanics in Texas. And there are a lot of folks in Texas who are Hispanic who like Ted a lot. And so that may be the extent of his support. Every Texan Hispanic, but not much beyond the state of Texas.
Okay, so how does he then win over the Hispanics outside of Texas who then think that he is anti-immigration and anti-Hispanic?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, when he rereads that column, I hope my friend does reread that column, he shouldn't come across as someone who is expecting people to play by the rules when we already have it established that Rafael Cruz, Ted's dad, bribed his way out of Cuba. That's what Rafael himself said in an interview with NPR some time ago. When you have a father who gets out of Cuba by bribing his way out, not coming the right way, and you get on a soapbox and you're high and mighty about people coming the right way, people are going to call you on that. So I think he needs to find some empathy. He needs to be able to say, you know what, I come from a community that suffered. I understand that you're suffering. But given the Cuban Adjustment Act and the magic carpet that makes it so easy for Cubans to come here, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to lecture you about morality. I'm going to tell you that, I understand what you're going through to some degree, and this is how we make a better country.
20 seconds before we take a break. You mentioned Marco Rubio. Many people see him as a flip-flopper on immigration. Do you think that Ted Cruz would be a better choice for Hispanics in America than Marco Rubio?
Absolutely. The one thing about Ted is consistently wrong on immigration, but he's consistent. He's right on many other issues. Marco Rubio, who I have a great fondness for and great hopes for, he has made a complete mess out of this issue. no conservative or liberal knows where he stands. Both distrust him on this issue, and that's hurt him tremendously.
Yes or no? Is he wasting his time running for president?
Marco Rubio is probably wasting his time running for president because Jeb Bush is going to take a lot of support from Florida, some of the same donors. With one exception, Marco Rubio, I'm on his side on Cuba. I think he is the most effective spokesperson in the country.
Hold that thought. We're going to be right back here on Midpoint. Syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette Jr. returns for a second turn here on Midpoint. Ruben, quickly, I'm going to let you finish your thought as far as Marco Rubio is concerned, because you don't see him as any threat whatsoever to people like Ted Cruz or Jeb Bush, do you?
I don't think there's much room for people to stand in a race like this. And it's really crazy. You've got at least 12, maybe as many as 15 or 16 people thinking about running for president. They're all going to be looking for their share of fundraising dollars, but also oxygen. What's my issue? Where do people look to me? Marco Rubio is lucky enough to have one of those issues. On Cuba, on the Cuba policy, he speaks very effectively. He's right on the issue. It could separate him from people like Jeb and others. So that's to his benefit.
You mentioned the wet foot, dry foot policy, of course, and that is a special for Cubans who come over and cross and leave Cuba right now. The Cuban government is unhappy about it as we continue to try to see if we're going to get back more involved with them. But wait a minute now. There are people who say that's the right policy. Others will say, well, if we have wet foot, dry foot, why don't we have north foot, south foot, if you want to go ahead and put it into another area here. Why don't we do that then? Is it just because of political gain?
It was mostly, it's a relic of the Cold War. It's the Cuban Adjustment Act of 1966. It sort of made sense back then, but for a lot of people, and including many younger Cubans, it doesn't make much sense now. And the problem, I think the predicament for Cubans is because they come into the country with basically a green card waiting for them at shore, it's very difficult for them to lecture Mexicans about how to come, quote, the right way. So I would prefer, more of an equal playing field.
But is it just because, but let me interrupt you there, is it just because there have been more Cuban Americans in a position of power in Congress and in lawmakers? That's it? There haven't been enough Mexicans in there or people of Mexican descent in order to get that fixed?
That and the fact that there's a very strong Cuban American lobby that has worked with members of Congress in the past, given them lots of money, provided votes for them. So Cubans do enjoy a kind of affirmative action when it comes to immigration policy, thanks to their political power.
All right, now, Latinos. Angry at D.C. Democrats. That is the headline in Politico. There specifically, it says, angry about California Attorney General Kamala Harris going for Senate. They feel like it's an anointment. They're not giving Hispanics a chance there. So the simply put question here is, regarding Harris and others, are Latinos in this country angry at D.C. Democrats enough to potentially shift to the Republican side in 2016?
Latinos are angry at Democrats for lots of things, including the one you just mentioned. They're always playing second fiddle to African Americans. The black-brown thing that is something that Democrats have to deal with. Kamala Harris might, in fact, make a fine senator from California, where I live. But the fact that the race was open for 5 minutes and now it's closed already to people like Antonio Villaraigosa is ticking off Hispanics. So Hispanics outnumber African Americans significantly in a place like California, almost 3-1. And they feel shortchanged here by a party that they have carried a lot of water for over the years, by the way. And so Democrats do owe them, and they don't often deliver.
Is the anger then more from the Hispanics who are now Democrats? Is the anger more at African Americans themselves, the fact that they feel that not just America themselves, but that black America is getting advantages that they should be given as well?
I never hear that. It's interesting. I don't hear that. I hear it mostly directed at white liberals who somehow put African Americans first, because I don't think that anybody would blame, I certainly don't, Kamala Harris for wanting to run for the U.S. Senate. The problem is, I think we should look at more nominations, and it's been awfully quick how quickly the door closed. And D.C. Democrats, the white folks who run the party, have not done well by Hispanics.
30 seconds left. You've talked about President Obama's executive action on immigration complicating the GOP Hispanic outreach. Isn't that natural? Of course he wants to complicate it. That's why he does it.
Exactly right. He lays the trap, and the elephants charge right into the trap. It's very difficult for the Republicans to do two things at once. One is mend fences with Hispanics and say, we're your friends, we mean no animosity, and repeal this executive action if they can or defund it. Now, they're going to have to choose at one point. They
so
can't
which
do
one's,
both.
okay, then there's the point. Which one then, in your opinion, is most important? Make a choice.
For me, it's the outreach, because I don't think the Republicans should be losing more elections. They lose it, and they make it too easy on Republican or Democrats to beat them.
So basically make friends with the Hispanics at this level and then worry about the other later when you have them in your side.
As Al Davis, the former head of the Oakland Raiders, used to say, just win, baby, just win.
You get Al Davis in there, you make me happy, because I heard him say that so many times. Ruben Navarrette Jr., it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Another man who fears no controversy, despite the fact he's often dead wrong and nothing more than a race-baiting fraud in the minds of many. He certainly has shown it in the minds of many after what happened in Ferguson. We'll focus on that with a special report after the break right here on Midpoint.